What if the Constitution of the United States was not born from unity, but from fear, rivalry, and fragile compromise? In the years after independence, the young nation stood on the edge of collapse. Leaders who once fought side by side now disagreed deeply, and the future of democracy itself hung in uncertainty. In 1783, the American Revolutionary War ended, and the 13 former colonies finally stood free from British rule. Victory brought celebration, but also a dangerous question. How could 13 independent states survive as one nation? The newly formed United States operated under the Articles of Confederation, a system designed to prevent centralized power. Ironically, this fear of tyranny created a government too weak to function effectively. Congress had no authority to collect taxes directly. It could request money from the states, but compliance was voluntary. War debts mounted, soldiers remained unpaid, and economic instability spread across the young republic. Each state pursued its own interests, issuing separate currencies and imposing trade barriers against one another. Unity, once forged in revolution, began to fracture under peace. By the mid-1780s, the crisis deepened. Farmers struggled with debt and rising taxes, particularly in Massachusetts. In 1786, an uprising, later known as Shays' Rebellion, revealed how fragile the nation had become. Armed protesters challenged state authority, alarming political leaders who feared that disorder might destroy the Republican experiment entirely. For many influential figures, the rebellion was not merely a local conflict, it was a warning that the government lacked the power to maintain stability. Behind closed doors, prominent leaders began exchanging urgent letters. Some believed liberty required stronger national authority, while others feared that centralized power would recreate the very tyranny they had just escaped. Trust was scarce, and visions for the nation's future sharply diverged. The United States had achieved independence, but independence alone was not enough. Survival now depended on a decision far more difficult than war: redefining power itself. As calls for reform grew louder, delegates prepared to gather in Philadelphia, unaware that their meeting would ignite intense debates, personal rivalries, and a struggle that would reshape the meaning of government forever.
In the summer of 1787, America's most powerful minds gathered in Philadelphia, not to celebrate democracy, but to quietly rewrite it. Windows were sealed, guards stood watch, and secrecy became law. Why would leaders of a new republic hide their discussions from the very people they claimed to represent? And what were they afraid of? In May 1787, delegates from 12 of the 13 states arrived in Philadelphia for what was officially called a convention to revise the Articles of Confederation. Instead, what unfolded would become one of the most consequential political gatherings in history. The meeting took place inside Independence Hall, where strict secrecy rules were enforced. Windows remained shut despite the summer heat, and delegates agreed that no discussions would be shared publicly. The reason was simple: honesty required privacy. Many leaders believed that openly admitting the failures of the existing government could spark unrest across the fragile nation. Yet beneath this practical concern lay deeper tensions. Delegates arrived carrying competing visions of power, representation, and human nature itself. Some, like Madison, argued that a stronger national government was essential for stability and economic survival. Others feared centralized authority, convinced it could evolve into another form of monarchy. Large states demanded representation based on population, believing their greater size deserved greater influence. Smaller states resisted fiercely, worried they would be politically erased. Debates quickly grew intense. Voices rose, alliances shifted, and compromise seemed distant. Delegates were not merely designing institutions, they were negotiating the balance between liberty and control. Every proposal carried risk. Too much democracy, some feared, could lead to chaos. Too much authority could destroy freedom. Amid these disagreements, one reality became clear. The revolution had united the colonies against a common enemy, but peace exposed their differences. The convention was no longer about fixing a document, it was about deciding what kind of nation America would become. As days turned into weeks, the delegates realized that agreement would demand painful concessions, sacrifices that would test both their ideals and their ambitions. Soon, the most explosive question of all would emerge, one that threatened to shatter the convention entirely and force the delegates to confront the deepest contradictions within their new nation. How do you build a nation when every solution creates a new conflict? Inside the Philadelphia Convention, debates reached a breaking point. Representation, power, and human freedom collided in ways no delegate could ignore. The Constitution would not emerge from agreement alone, but from compromises that carried moral and political consequences for generations. By the summer of 1787, tensions inside the Constitutional Convention had intensified. The central conflict revolved around representation. Who would truly hold power in the new government? Large states supported the Virginia Plan, which proposed representation based on population. Smaller states, fearing domination, rallied behind the New Jersey Plan, demanding equal representation regardless of size. The disagreement threatened to end the convention entirely. Delegates argued for days, aware that failure could dissolve the fragile union. Finally, a breakthrough emerged in what became known as the Great Compromise. The proposal created a bicameral legislature, a House of Representatives based on population, and a Senate granting equal representation to every state. It was not a perfect solution, but it preserved the possibility of unity. Yet an even deeper conflict soon surfaced: slavery. Southern states depended economically on enslaved labor and demanded political recognition of their population, including enslaved people. Northern delegates objected, arguing that individuals denied freedom should not increase political power. The debate exposed a profound contradiction within a nation founded on ideals of liberty. The resulting 3/5 compromise counted enslaved people as 3/5 of a person for representation and taxation purposes. For some delegates, it was a necessary political concession to keep the Union intact. For others, it was a troubling moral compromise that postponed an unavoidable national reckoning. Emotionally, the convention grew heavy with uncertainty. Delegates understood they were shaping a government meant to endure centuries, yet many sensed unresolved tensions beneath their agreements. The Constitution was slowly taking form, not as a flawless vision, but as a structure built through negotiation, fear, and reluctant compromise. The question now shifted from design to trust. Would Americans accept a stronger national government, or see it as a betrayal of the revolution? Outside Philadelphia, skepticism was already growing. As the finished Constitution prepared to face public judgment, a fierce battle of ideas would erupt, one fought not with weapons, but with words capable of shaping the nation's destiny. The Constitution was written, but far from accepted. Across the young nation, newspapers ignited fierce debates, friendships fractured, and citizens questioned whether liberty itself was in danger. Could a stronger government protect freedom or quietly destroy it? The real struggle had now moved from closed rooms in Philadelphia to the minds of the American people. In September 1787, the Constitutional Convention concluded, and the proposed Constitution was sent to the states for ratification. Approval required agreement of 9 of the 13 states, a daunting challenge in a nation already divided by suspicion and political rivalry. Almost immediately, 2 opposing camps emerged, each convinced they were defending the true spirit of the revolution. Supporters of the Constitution became known as Federalists. Leaders such as Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay argued that a stronger national government was essential to prevent economic collapse and internal conflict. Through a series of essays later called the Federalist Papers, they carefully explained the structure of the new system, emphasizing checks and balances designed to prevent tyranny. Opponents, known as anti-federalists, feared something very different. They believed the proposed government concentrated too much authority in distant institutions, placing individual liberties at risk. Public meetings grew heated, newspapers published sharp criticisms, and political debate spread into taverns, marketplaces, and homes. Emotionally, the nation stood divided between hope and fear. Farmers, merchants, and veterans of the revolution all faced the same question. Could trust be placed in leaders once power was centralized again? The memory of British rule remained fresh, shaping every argument and every doubt. Gradually, a compromise began to take shape. Federalists recognized that ratification might fail unless guarantees of personal freedoms were added. The promise of future amendments protecting individual rights began to shift public opinion, calming some fears while leaving others unresolved. The Constitution moved closer to acceptance, but its survival depended on one final assurance that liberty would not be forgotten. As the new government prepared to take its first breath, a decisive addition would redefine the relationship between citizens and power and determine whether the Constitution could truly endure the test of history.
The Constitution was finally ratified, but victory did not bring certainty. Many Americans still feared the government they had just created. To preserve trust, leaders faced one last challenge, proving that power could exist without crushing liberty. The solution would redefine democracy itself and shape the future of rights for generations. By 1788, the Constitution secured enough state approvals to become the governing framework of the United States. Yet ratification did not end the nation's anxiety. Anti-federalists remained deeply concerned that the new federal government possessed too much authority. Without clear protections for individual freedoms, many believed the revolution's ideals remained incomplete. James Madison, once skeptical about listing specific rights, came to recognize a political reality. Unity required reassurance. In 1789, he introduced a series of amendments designed to safeguard personal liberties and limit governmental power. These proposals drew from state constitutions, Enlightenment philosophy, and the demands voiced during the ratification debates. By 1791, 10 amendments were formally adopted, becoming known as the Bill of Rights. They guaranteed freedoms such as speech, religion, press, assembly, and fair legal protections. For many citizens, this moment transformed the Constitution from a feared instrument of authority into a balanced agreement between government and the governed. Emotionally, the early republic entered a new phase. The Constitution was no longer merely a political experiment. It became a living framework shaped by compromise and adaptation. Yet the struggles that defined its creation did not disappear. Questions about federal power, state authority, and equality continued to challenge the nation in the decades that followed. The hidden power struggles behind the Constitution revealed a profound truth. Democracy was never a finished achievement. It was a negotiation, constantly tested by human ambition, fear, and hope. The founders had not created perfection. They had created a system capable of change. The Constitution endured because conflict was not avoided, but because disagreement itself was built into its design, a fragile balance intended to survive generations yet unseen. The story may seem complete, But the true legacy of these compromises would echo through future crises, proving that the struggle over power and liberty was only beginning. What did you think of this video about American history? If you enjoyed it, we regularly upload many informative and knowledge-based videos on this channel, so please consider subscribing to stay connected with us. Thank you for watching the video until the end.